All right. Welcome, everybody, to another live episode of the Headless Giant podcast. We are now on YouTube and X. Right now, I've got 33 Rule the Magi on here to talk with us about the International Order of Oddfellows, the IOOF. And here he is. Introduce yourself, Magi.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on your broadcast. And I send love and positive energy to everybody listening. And so basically, I've been, you know, researching, and I come from a family of magicians and wizards. And so we also experienced World War II. And so I was always curious about what the hell really happened. And so when you dig into World War II, then you start to unpeel the onion that they've created. And so World War II was a big hoax, okay, on humanity. It was about the Tartarian Empire, free energy, and wiping out all the Jews to bring them down to the state that they created, Israel. And so they killed everybody. And so I'm an Ashkenazi Jew, and so my mother was born in '41, and basically after the war, her father was from Spain, running from Franco, and anyhow, he was murdered. And the point is that after the war, okay, where our United States did a lot of bombing and killing that most people don't know about, and so after that, they took my mother and her sister and put them in orphanages, okay? And that was because they deemed that any woman that didn't have a man in the family couldn't raise their children. And so that was reprogramming. And so that ties into the Oddfellows, right? Because they're an offshoot of the Masons, okay? And they were designed during the reset, because we had a reset in 1902. And so before that, they were doing incubator babies, designer babies. They've been doing this for like forever. Most people can't contemplate that, but it's all documented. They were giving humanized food to people. And so, and you can see all the orphan trains. And if you go and study Tartaria, you'll see a lot of pictures have whited out backgrounds. That's because they don't want you to see the blimps that had free travel, and they had stargates. And so bombing of Dresden was part of that, wiping out that whole area, and anything that, would actually be a remnant of the free energy, Star Force, and, all that stuff. And so then they decided to repopulate. And that's when they started moving people that didn't even speak the language, and they would retrain them. And so the Oddfellows were the orphans, and they were basically coddled by the Freemasons, an offshoot. And so then they would become part of the Masons and mentor all of these orphans. And this is how they maintain control. Okay. And that's where all the asylums were about. And they would actually even like create children. It was just a wild thing that most people can't contemplate.
Right. Well, to back you up a little bit, so if you go back and look at World's Fair photographs from New York City, you'll find that there's incubator babies. They're advertising incubator babies. Now, are these babies for sale? Where do they come from? Why are they doing it? And during the same time period, we also see these orphan trains full of children going out west. Now, people have a hard time wrapping their mind around how that could be. But for one thing, I think we should all remember that slavery is a form of human farming, right? And human farming implies that the humans are actually being selected for certain traits and certain capabilities, right? So when we're looking at the phenomenon of orphan trains and incubator babies, it's important to realize that a lot of people were held in captivity during that time, and they could be used very easily as vessels for their offspring. And then you just get rid of the parents, right? I mean, what do you need them for anyway? And there were very, very poor people living in ghettos that they would treat like chattel slaves because why not? They could get away with it. So these programs shouldn't be off the table. They are barbaric and they are monstrous, but they shouldn't be off the table for people. And once you understand that, then the idea of cloning and all the rest of this stuff, well, they had human stock. Why couldn't they just use humans?
To your point, if you look at the Coney Island event that they had, they actually had like big signs, incubator babies. Pick out your designer baby. This is nothing new. And just to touch on that, if people can't grasp that, Skype was advertised in the '60s. We had electric cars. What they're showing you today about with the electric cars, well, that's just a rundown version of what they had. Edison had a battery that would still be workable today that went 1,000 miles. Okay, so what they had this technology that's provable, and all the fires that happened in the early 1900s across the United States that are now happening again, it's like rinse, wash, and repeat. And we could even
Right.
go to the 1919 plague. We have the 2019, so that, we have the cycles 138 years, right? Where we got 2040, May 16, 2040 coming up. But they work on this whole thing as a project of reshaping the way we think every 100 years. So they plan beforehand. And so what they do is they reprogram your mind and they wipe out and change the books. If you read anything after 1902, it's probably fake news. Okay, all the stuff that's been written. That's why I only, go by accredited authors that have written stuff before the 1900s. And so what they did was they were making these children. They even kind of made people buy cabbage patches, and they were growing them like cabbage patches. That's what the whole idea of that was. And so then you don't have a sense of your history. And the people who are doing it, they know their history. This isn't any black magic. This is just, tomfoolery.
Well, I mean, that's the thing too, is like if you've got a group of people who are in on it and they've been in on it for centuries and they understand how it works, a very small group of people, mind you, but there's still a significant portion of them. They're not going to tell you that they're buying you as a orphan. They're not going to tell you that they're buying you off of the street. They're in on it. They've been in on it since the very beginning. And what you'll find a lot too is that this SRA family structure goes so far back into history, they don't even know their own history. They just participate in the same cycles that they've been caught up in. And what they end up doing is finding, the same kind of successes because they're put into positions of power. The people around them don't know who they are because they've got different personalities that come out for different events. And these type of things have been bred into people, right? And so the idea that it would be impossible to get away with this, mind control was figured out thousands of years ago. Thousands of years ago, they figured out mind control. So it's not hard to come to grips with this stuff when you realize that. I mean, the idea of demonizing a person goes back to Mesopotamian times, right? The bricks we
Absolutely.
find say that kind of stuff. So, if we're if we're going to be honest here, we have to be really fucking honest because the ancient families knew about this and used it regularly. Yiz is in
100%.
the chat. What up, Yiz? He's a great
Hello.
guy.
Listen, they've been doing this. Look, the Roman Empire never left. Okay, and
Right.
we got the Khazars, the Caesars. And, listen, my family is my grandma's last name was Khan. Okay, so you know that should tell you something right there. We go back to Genghis Khan, and Genghis Khan, ran this empire, and so the Khazars and the Caesars are one and the same.
Right. Right. Well, that whole Eastern Roman Empire had a lot of contact with the Khazarians. A lot, almost like they were completely aligned. Right. So anytime the Khazars would attack, they would always be attacking the barbarians occupying Rome. Right. And so they never actually went after the Eastern Empire, even though they were supposedly enemies, and they were never enemies. They had complete control.
But listen, that goes to exactly what's happening today. Saudi Arabians, they're Jews. Okay, let's fucking keep it real. Okay, and that's where they have the whole thing. And why doesn't anybody do anything? Because they have the weapons of mass destruction. They'll send you a tornado. They'll send you an earthquake. They'll I've seen what they can do. And this even goes back to testimony that I heard from Napoleon's War, that there
What
was
happened in
20
Turkey
degrees.
last year? Do you
Was
remember?
that?
What happened in
Was
Turkey last year?
it? Yeah, of course.
It was a
Listen, there,
huge earthquake. It tore Turkey apart right as soon
yeah,
as the balls were in the sky, right? So the balls go through the sky, and then a huge earthquake in Turkey. That was not a coincidence. It was a
no.
coordinated attack.
You know what, and that's what they've been doing forever, because they just keep you busy. I mean, even look like what's going on today. They've got like this Epstein's list, and then they've got this alien invasion, allegedly, in Miami, and which is Maya. And so, hey, don't look over there while we jabbed you with the COVID, because we want to keep you so busy that you can't look where you're not supposed to, and really you're supposed to look within. And so they've been
Right,
at this for a long time, and going back to the orphans, right? They, when you don't know your history, right? Like, I didn't really have much family, but I'm tuning into them now, right? And so, because our, what is it? From this time, go back, it's like a million family members, easy, right? And so, and people don't really grasp that. And the main thing of wiping us out, and people can't grasp it, is the divine creator has a reset, and it's every 138 years, depending on how humanity is going. So this isn't black magic, okay? In my opinion, black magic is hokey, because basically it's magnetism and mentalism, right, and energy, and they're basically taking your history. They know theirs. They know and they know how karma works, and so they get everybody to actually comply. Okay, so this way they don't handle the karma that comes along with what they do. And so I think that people get confused on how that works, because black magic doesn't work if you're connected to source. There's nothing anybody could do to me, unless they pulled out a gun and shot me, because I'm protective of my energy, and this is what this is all about. They know their history, you don't, and you can only go back maybe to your grandparents, and so then and their grandparents have probably been reprogrammed, and you have to break it, and they only give you like 100 years, and by the time you get there, you're not figuring shit out, man. Most people. So I think that's what the design of that whole thing is. And even the same thing goes to the changing of the languages.
right. Well, let's go over a little bit of the history. So the
Yeah.
professed history of the Oddfellows is that they were started at the same time as the Freemasons, right? So these two organizations were hand in glove since the very beginning. And if you know about secret societies, they love to have more than one target. So both the Freemasons and the Oddfellows were shut down in England, supposedly, for quite a while. Now, the English monarchy that shut them down said that these are clearly subversive activities that they're engaged in. Obviously, whatever happened to that? They were doing subversion back in the 1700s, but they aren't doing it today. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So after that, the main Oddfellow guy said that he wanted to get, this is why they call them the Oddfellows. He wanted to get lawyers, he wanted to get architects, he wanted to get a bunch of different jobs together into one union. And they called them the Oddfellows is because they didn't have a union for these people. Now, trade unions have been at the heart of controlling labor for thousands of years. And always, when you go back into the history of trade unions and labor unions, you'll find that they're started by fraternal organizations, because controlling the labor is how you control the flow of value into an area, right? So you've got these trade unionists, and you've got these Freemasons, and you've got these occultists that are always hand in glove. And the reason why they're so similar is because this is the military structure that they operate under, right? And it's very obvious that it's a military type
Yeah,
operation,
absolutely.
because all the people in it, come from a military background. I think the military is the first form of cult, right? So they've got
Yep.
these military organizations like The Mithras. The Mithras cult was strictly military, only military. And the reason why is because it's just so much easier to control the entire country when you control the minds of the military. It all comes down to the cult mentality. So once they have these organizations in place, they end up controlling the labor of these areas. Well, the Oddfellows controlled a bunch of different, vastly disparate forms of trade that didn't have a union at the time. And they kept that tradition up well into the United States. So the Oddfellows was actually the largest fraternal organization in the world in the 1920s. They had a march. I think Franklin Delano Roosevelt was also an Oddfellow. So a lot of people came from the Oddfellow Society.
That's funny.
They're still around to this day. Unfortunately, you're not going to find them in your town anymore. You might find their old buildings.
Yep.
The old buildings always have 3 chain links on top of it, either over an eye or related to an eye. So if you look around at the buildings, you'll find a brick somewhere that has 3 chain links on it. That's their symbol. It's different from the Freemason symbol. But one of the reasons why they were so huge and so popular is they were one of the first fraternal organizations that allowed women to meet with the men. Right. And so the
Yeah,
Oddfellow
and they had a
Society
separate organization too. Yeah, they had a separate organization too, and one of their things is the Oddfellows and the Masons, different paths to the same goal.
right, right. So the Oddfellows were a little bit more liberal than the Freemasons, who didn't allow women at all. And then they formed the Eastern Stars as sort of an offshoot organization for the same group. Now, we're talking about 1/4 of America. That's a pretty significant portion. We're all part of these fraternal organizations in some form or another that were all basically started by Freemasons.
Yeah,
So,
they also have another offshoot too, the Boulay Society. I mean, this is and it's interesting that they all disappeared, right? Where'd they
right.
go?
Well, I think what it is it has to do with religion. So when you've got a religion like a church or something, it becomes a little bit harder to segment off the population and start using them for your goals. But if you've got fraternal organizations attached to trade, then it becomes a lot easier to just sort of split people off and use them in your own direction. So these fraternal organizations offered something that churches didn't, which was health insurance, life insurance, right? So one of the first things they offered was life insurance for cheap, right? So it was kind of a novel concept. If you had an unexpected death, they would pay for your funeral. A lot of the times they didn't. They found ways around it and they didn't pay for it. So a lot of the health benefits and life insurance benefits all went uncollected. If you read about fraternal organizations from libertarians, they're going to be gushing this like it's a private organization that's providing insurance. They didn't really provide insurance. They would always cancel it. They never paid their debts. They were always bad when it came to that. But anytime you see a mutual bank or a mutual insurance company or a mutual whatever, it came out of the mutual aid societies or the fraternal organizations because there were a lot of them. They were in every town and everybody was a part of them. So what ended up happening was the government decided that they needed to fix healthcare in 1910, right? So this is during the height of the, I guess you would call it the Rockefeller takeover of medicine, right? So during the height of the Rockefeller takeover of medicine, they decided they needed the AMA to regulate what they called lodge practice. So lodge practice was all of the hospitals, all of the orphanages, like you were just saying, were owned by these different mutual aid societies, right? And so one good example is Moose Heart in Chicago. So Moose Heart in Chicago was a home for orphans of members of the Moose Lodge. So if you were a member and you died and you had a kid that couldn't be taken care of, they would go to the Moose Lodge. Well, Moose Lodge had pretty much good outcomes, but there are a lot of reports there of abuse. A lot, tons.
Yep.
So there's 2 sides to this story. Were they providing some services to their members? Yeah. Were they also very abusive? Double yeah, right?
Yep.
And what you're talking about goes right to the heart of it, right? This is how they would select for future members is they would
Yep.
basically, I mean, MK Ultra is nothing new. The idea of traumatic mind control is nothing new. They've been doing it over and over again. And this is what they were doing in these organizations. So just to give that background, it makes a lot of sense that the Oddfellows were involved in things like the orphan train. Now, I know that there was a Freemason that was heading up the orphan train organization, and he was shipping kids over from Europe, very, very small children from Europe, over to America to be on these orphan trains to go work on farms out west. Where were they getting these kids from? Nobody's really explained that to a great degree, and none of the orphans remember.
Yep.
So it's
But you know
exactly
why
like
they
you're
don't
saying.
remember? It's all design. It's trauma. And that's why I believe that there's a very close relationship between the Masons and the Oddfellows. That's it. They may told us they're
Absolutely.
going on two paths, but they have the same goal, and that's what's really necessary. And when they created those babies, those incubator babies, when they wiped us out before, they actually mentor those kids and teach them these things, and then they bring them into the fold so they can control the other orphans. And so they made
Right.
them the leaders and the doctors of all of that. That's how they maintain control.
Right. All governments exist because there was a cult that put them there. All governments exist because there was a cult that put them there. You have to have the true believers at the very core, at the very center, who have believed all the bullshit and put them in positions of power because that's what's necessary. You take a look at a guy like Mitt Romney, who's fully engaged in the cult of Mormonism, fully engaged, top tier of Mormonism. And he's in government because he's a member of this cult. And this cult has a lot to do with the recording of paternal histories.
I can't
If you're
remember. I can't remember Mitt Romney's exact place where he went, but he was in finance, and he was actually went to through the Mormon schools, and they're very, very powerful. And so they
absolutely
put these people in places on purpose.
the vast majority of CIA members and FBI members are members of the Mormon Church. They draw the most recruits from Utah.
That's
That shouldn't be
interesting.
surprising.
Well,
So
listen,
Yiz
that's a
says Romney
surprising
is
thing.
Bain Capital. Bain Capital, that was his company.
Right, but
So yeah, it's it.
him and many of the others went to that same school, and no, it was not school. It was the brokerage firm, right? Did you freeze?
Yeah, Bain Capital.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. And
Right.
so they're very powerful, and even like all those, like a lot of these hospitals were mental institutions. People don't even realize that they've just been like repurposed. Just like the churches were when they were cathedrals, they made them cathedrals.
Absolutely. And Yiz is right. Mormons are extremely powerful and deeply embedded in secret societies and government. They also create the opposition to the, yeah, he says it's a hedge fund. So they also create the opposition to Mormonism. So in Utah, what you'll find is that Mormons actually run the alternative or, spiritualist cults that are meant for people trying to escape Mormonism.
It's interesting you just said that, is that they used to have an anti-Freemason society where they would fight the Freemasons, and they got rid of them.
Right. So in the 1820s, there was an anti-Masonic party, 1826. Now, what's funny about the anti-Masonic party, it was headed up by a guy who was a member of the Order of Cincinnati.
There
Now,
you
the
go.
Society of Cincinnati is the order that the president is inducted into every time a new one is elected. So every president is automatically a member of the Society of the Cincinnati. And the Society of the Cincinnati was started by colonial generals that were regulars, right? They were not militiamen. So the militiamen would not be members because they're not related to the families of Europe. So this country was started by a hereditary military junta called the Society of the Cincinnati, and every single president that has come since has been a member of it. That should take somebody back and say, well, we don't live in a democracy. We don't live in a republic. We never have, and we never will at this rate, because nobody's talking about the Society of the Cincinnati.
But and you know what? Just to clarify for people, since most people don't do the work to actually watch that incredible two-part series that you guys did. Look, the people who founded this country, right? The founding of let me just the founding fathers with quotes, right? They were all esquire. They came from where? From England, right? And so
England.
they gave us the Tartarian Constitution, but they knew that they were going to write treaties in, and they were going to break all the treaties. Okay, so basically, we've been set up, I think it was 1781 or whatever. And yeah, it's just amazing that, most people don't realize that, oh, they're the founding fathers. Yeah, they were Masons, man. And they were in the Club of Cincinnati. And yeah, they were esquires. So, however you want to look at it, there's just too many red flags.
Right. Way too many. And we need to start realizing that and start saying anybody in the Society of the Cincinnati is not welcome to rule. And if people got the balls and backbone to say that, it would be over. These are the roots of the tree that they've planted here, And once you get rid of the Society of the Cincinnati out of the White House and out of power entirely, then you're looking at some major changes. But there's a reason why people like Alex Jones and Glenn Beck and all the rest of these people never say the Society of Cincinnati, because that is the
Yeah.
heart of this country, and they know that they want to preserve that at all costs. They're just as fake and just as fraud as everybody else is, because they won't even say the obvious. And
They they
obviously,
give you this about this much, and they lead you in a direction to be mad and angry, right? Because that's what this whole thing is about, right? Because we have this reset coming, and they know that the last one wasn't so bad, but they're whipping this up into a frenzy because this is how they get to actually get away with what they're doing. So they're going to reset society again, and then they're going to start their same bullshit. And you even have Noah, whatever his name is, with the
Ferrari.
Schwaben land over there, saying
Yeah.
all this nonsense like, we're going to create a new religion. It's going to be by AI. You know what? He's not lying.
Right. Well, it doesn't take much, because that's all they do is make cults. Making cults is all they've ever done, because making a cult and getting it into power is the easiest thing in the world when you know the formula.
Yep.
I just wanted to respond to Truth 33. Yes, the Jacobins started the French Revolution, and the Society of the Cincinnati were actively engaged on both sides of the French Revolution. So in 1783, both sides of the French Revolution had society members on it. Now, later on, Napoleon was a Society of the Cincinnati member, right? So when he was installed into power, it was not a coincidence. When we purchased Louisiana, that was actually a default on loans that France had made to England. So what they said is England can basically have the entire New World, because after the Battle of 1812, the British took over all major institutions in America. They took over all of them. So why can't we say that they were in charge at that point? Like, they took over Yale, they took over Harvard, they burned down Washington, D.C. We lost the Battle of 1812. Nobody wants to admit that, but we did. They took over all the institutions after that, at that point. So when the British bought the Louisiana Purchase, that was them squaring up with France. That was it. They're like, France, you're done here. France and America started the Society of the Cincinnati, and it's been a war between France and
France,
England
there
through
you
that
go.
society ever since. So just wanted to clarify that.
And you know what's interesting is that you brought up 1812, right? And also Louisiana, which is under French rule, right? And so that's when we go back to, okay, let's take a look at the what is it, East Indian Corporation, right? And so at that time, when when we were basically, they started making new France, New Germany, New England, and, New York, and they sold us that thing. We sold it for $5. Shut up. All right, but the point is that in 1812, okay, so they basically took immigrants, and that's how what they do. They took them from everywhere and replanted everybody here. So nobody like, huh? Who are you? Oh, same thing as the Tower of Babel bullshit, right? And so in
Right.
1812, most people don't know that in that time period, every country was having civil wars, okay, and there was cataclysms going on, okay, and that was like a major reset. And one of the things that even like when we talk about Napoleon fucking had weapons he had these directed weapon energies because I've read testimonies from both sides of the war that said that a 20-degree fucking a beam of light came in and wiped stuff out. So they've been doing this stuff, wiping people out, reconstituting them, separating them, giving them new beliefs, and demanding. It's the same thing with Christianity. I mean, the only thing it's ever done was conquer humanity.
Now, here's something to remember. So the colonies had been around for almost 300 years by the time the American Revolution kicked off. And you're telling me that that's not enough time for these royal bloodlines to take over the colonies completely. You're telling me that. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. The royal
What's that?
bloodlines had complete control before and after the war. And there's no denying that at this point.
Oh, no, no, no. These are all contrived things. Okay, no, they've always had control. They've never lost it. They've had, like people say, oh, they don't have the technology. Man, they have it. They've always had control. They reset, and everything is an illusion. And I suspect that this is going to continue because, I have a different view on that, but that's a little bit off topic. But, this is going to continue because this is what plagues humanity.
Right. Well, a lot of people don't realize how much power an egregore can have, right? An egregore can be multi-generational. A multi-generational egregore is how magical families work, right? They've got their practices based around these specific beliefs that have been passed on for generations. And what they gain from that is something that is not easy to quantify. What they gain is that between lives, they're able to retain memories. This has always been the goal of these families, is to retain memories between lives. That's what they do. This is why none of us have any of the information we need, because we're born here completely naked, alone, and without any memory of our previous lives. Well, I say, look, the difference between magic and black magic is simple. Magic is something that you can figure out for yourself. Black magic has to come from an entity who wants sacrifice in return, right? So it wants the benefits from you. It wants to be your only source of truth. It wants to be your only source of everything. Well, what do all these cults have in common? There's only one source of truth, and it comes directly from our guys. You are being used and harvested for your energy for the people at the top of that organization to retain their memories, to maintain control between lives. This is how it's always worked. It's how it's always going to work.
I don't disagree. Listen, they kill you if you get in the way, and then they keep changing the game as time goes on. Even they've changed many things over the years, and it's all to keep us on balance. They can reconstitute us, but what the one thing they can't do is reconstitute a soul. Okay, and
Right.
so they may remake us in test tubes, but they can't quantify a soul because that's by the creator. And so there's something to that, but we still don't have those memories. And then we come into this false illusion that they've created, and it takes quite a while to work through it. And especially when they traumatize you. And the first thing they try to make sure that they got everybody to do is get a circumcision. Okay, so this way they can traumatize you immediately, loose your fucking your blood during that ritual by actually taking the blood from the child and sexually traumatizing it. And so, then that puts you in a
I have a
very
proposal.
controllable state. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a proposal. So, what if we do a ancestral memory study? Because a lot of kids are born with some memory from their ancestors, from their progenitors. What if we did an ancestral memory study and compared that against the rates of circumcision in those individuals? I'll bet you would find that the circumcised individuals have a lot less ancestral memories coming through. I'll bet you, I'll bet you
Yeah,
dollars to dollars that's the case.
absolutely. Listen, I was circumcised and traumatized, and I figured it out. And I even did a ritual to take that, because what it is it's a phallic bowel ritual. Okay, it's a bowel phallic ritual, and basically the Egyptians, when they would capture you in a conflict, that would be the punishment, to circumcise. And so they have everybody doing that. So that trauma that you start an innocent child with makes them controllable and takes them away from their true inheritance. I agree.
Right. And always, wherever, you've got John Kellogg in the United States, but wherever you've got mass media, you've got the pushing of circumcision. It's
Yeah.
not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence.
Listen,
These
it's
families get
all
circumcised too. What I think is happening is that a lot of the circumcision done in these families is to a different degree. So the first form of circumcision was a puncture wound, right? We're not talking about cutting off the foreskin. It was just a small puncture. Now, since then, uh, the white people, especially, they have the largest circumcision. Even in Orthodox communities, they don't circumcise that much. It's a very small amount, right? And what the difference is I think the amount of pain and trauma that they want little boys to go through. They don't necessarily want it all that much for their own, but they like it for the goyim.
listen, and look, they do it. They're doing it to their own, right? So, look, I was born Jewish, right, and they did it to me, and I think actually that is the hardest thing to overcome, because I got to say that I think that a lot of Jews, okay, are programmed, right? And so they give you trauma. They traumatize you with circumcision, right? They swoosh your blood at infancy. And then, okay, you're the perennial victimhood, right? And so what does that do? That makes you like, oh shit, everybody else hates me. I better stick with the scumbags who fucked
Right.
me up in the first place. And so they don't even know that they're doing that, you know?
Trauma bonding.
Yeah.
Trauma bonding.
Yeah, it's like Stockholm syndrome,
Yep.
and like I was never with that, because I've overcome all the trauma from. I mean, man, I've had a lot of trauma in my life, but the thing is that we can overcome it. It's just, you have to pull yourself out. And I was struggling with a lot of ailments because of the abandonment. I was sexually abused physically and mentally as a child. But the thing is that I chose this because I knew how powerful I would become at the right time. And this is the right time to kind of stand out, because look, the hardest thing for a Jew to do is say that, hey, my tribe is scumbags. They've been hijacked by the Talmudis, and like to walk around. And so I got everybody hating me. Yeah, I have no, what is it? I have no harbor. I'm
Right.
okay
So
with
I
that.
think I think a lot of what the Khazarians have done to the Jews could be seen as, this trauma-based mind control and creating of a cult. So I think that the Khazarians are behind a lot of the Abrahamic religions as they exist today. And what they do to get to that point is not pretty. And I would recommend everybody go listen to episode 512 of the Confessionals. Look up episode 512 of the Confessionals on Spotify or YouTube or whatever. It's a guy who gets involved with a desert death cult that's wanting to kill him. And the very first question they ask him is his ethnicity and what his religion is. And he says he's Catholic. And they say they're, guess what?
Join or die.
No, they're Jewish. They say that they're Jewish. And so this whole desert death cult, they all were Eastern Europeans and they all claim to be Jewish. That's
Um,
Khazarian. If they're Eastern European and they've got a audible accent and they come from that part of the world and they're saying we're Jewish and we're here to do a ritual in the middle of the desert, you need to pay attention. That's not your standard Jewish person. That's not a standard Ashkenazi person. That is pure Khazarian blood right there. That is get the fuck out as soon as you fucking can.
Listen,
People
I
don't
would go ahead.
people don't realize that the idea of the vampire is not make believe. Like there's a group of people out there that have been around since the beginning of fuck. I mean, it's not Ashkenazi, right? The vast majority of the really, really dark shit comes from the backwoods of Eastern Europe, like really, really deep. Khazarians, they moved and merged into Europe to some degree or another, right? But Khazarians themselves, like this is where they built the massive city to the New World Order is in Kazakhstan. That's
Yep.
deep in Khazar territory, deep, because they controlled the entire Silk Road. This is where the term Yiddish comes from. It's a combination of languages used to control the Silk Road. That Silk Road goes all the way across the stands,
Yep.
Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all that stuff. That's where it's coming out of. A lot of people don't
Yep.
know it, but that's the heart of the beast, right?
And what's interesting is that, a lot of that, when we talk about the Khazars, I'll say that those are the Caesars, the Phoenicians, the Scythians, okay, and they've always been in control, okay, and so it's a matter of, and then we can go all the way back, and so I look at them as a runaway sect of Atlantis, right, the Black Magicians, okay, who kind of fucked everything up. Excuse my language.
That's fine. No. So Truth 33 asks, Khazarians aren't Ashkenazis. They are, but you got to understand that there's a relationship there. So the Ashkenazis went into Europe, right? And so they were immigrants away from this region. The Khazars stayed in that region, right? They stayed in that region and they maintained control over the families that were leaving that region through a lot of the processes that we're talking about now: circumcision, trauma based mind control. A lot of these things were passed down through the lineage. It's not necessarily, one is in control and one is not. And that's the way it's sort of been operated ever since the Iranian times. The Iranians were the closest link to the Scythians. And that's when there was a break between the Scythians and the Iranians, right? That's when there was
Aryans, the Aryans.
right. So there's a lot of stuff going on in ancient history that we don't have full control over or full view over. But I'm telling you, that's how the languages moved. And if we can map the languages, then we have a really good understanding of the people who stayed and the people who left. It's that simple, you know?
Well, listen, Headless, I did, as someone who's Jewish, I did a little deep dive into this. And so if we go back to the time when, what was it, Goma had kids, right? And there was Japhet and oh God, I can't, but anyway, it was the two sons, they hated each other. It was Japhet. And so they basically hijacked, okay, the Ashkenaz. So it was Ashkenaz and I can't remember the name, but the two brothers, okay, from the son of
Right.
Goma, okay, and they basically kind of merged, okay, and so they hijacked Ashkenaz, but they were Talmudis, okay, so there's been a convergence of where they actually circumvented the Torah with the Talmud and went by
Right.
those type of beliefs, okay, and ran that narrative, which is basically, anybody who's not them must be a slave.
Right. So the first people to adopt Christianity were the Vandals and the Goths, and they were from Germany, right? These were the first people to adopt Christianity. Why is that? Because Christianity was the most similar to their native beliefs. These were the first monotheists. These people established kingdoms all around the world. This was the empire of the horse, right? And so the empire of the horse, the Goths, the Scythians, the Vandals, they're all the same group. They're called different things throughout history, but they've always had a royal lineage that have been in charge of places. It's very good to keep that in mind, because once you have that history, then you can understand how they could spread these ideologies so quickly.
What's interesting is that it's the same thing with Christianity and even into the Native Americans with the Hopis, because you could find the stories of Christ in there, and even in the Vedas you could find that, and so they were able to take that story and make it and transcend, and so they got a lot of societies to say, okay, well, I just want to survive, so I'll go along with this bullshit.
Well, the thing that everybody has to realize is the biggest lie of history is that all these places are disconnected. They've never been disconnected. They've always been in contact with one another. That's the biggest lie, is that they've actually had a disconnect. It's not true. There's always been connection. They try to erase the connection with every reset and say, no, you're different from those people. You're different from those people. But that's not the case. There's always been an overlap.
What's interesting is, like, we have the Muslims, right? And they're the cousins of the Jews, right? And so they revere, Jesus, even though that's, Jupiter and Zeus, right? But they call it Yahushua, right? But the point is that they are the Khazarians, right? These Talmudis, they're running around trying to say that they're terrorists, but they're working with that fringe terrorist group who actually circumvented the Quran, which means peace. And so we have this game going on, demonizing our own family. And so we're all family in the end.
Right. It goes back to that lie. We are all conditioned to think that somehow these groups are separate. They've never been separate. There have always been empires that have ruled the entire planet, the entire planet. And they do so through ideological subversion. They do so through making themselves the center of the cult. It always happens that way. And they know how to do it. It's a formula, and they repeat the formula. And they go everywhere and they repeat the formula, and it works every time. This is why they think it's a human farm, is because they keep doing the same thing and we keep falling for it.
Well, that's the trick of the patriarchy, right? Because they've actually subverted the woman. And so once you fucking break up the home and you discount the value of a woman, okay, and a woman is more spiritually powerful than a man, and we're physically more powerful. And so once you separate that, and you could even see that in society where they're doing the transhumanism, oh, we don't need women, we could just make babies like they've been doing before, and discounting the power of the woman. And so then that puts men as, like, we have to be masculine and this and that. And that's why we have patriots. It's the patriarch. And they've all been tricked into this false paradigm. It's so, frustrating.
It's like the term aristocracy. The term Aryan is in the term aristocracy. The term Ara is within all of these different cultures as the ruling class, all the way from India to China. Everywhere has that word in some form or another, as it's been pigeonized, because there was one ruling empire over the whole planet, and they were called the Royal Scythian Line. And when you realize that, it's not impossible to understand that they've got the ability to do breeding programs that are unbelievable to us, because that's how they started. The horse was originally a squat donkey-like animal, and they took it from that and turned it into all of its forms to this day. They're experts in breeding. You don't think that they've been doing that to humans this whole time as well? That would be retarded. Obviously they have. They have complete control over their bloodlines.
It's interesting that you just said that, because traced my ancestry back to Zoroastrianism, and so I follow that, and so I know my heritage, and I know who I am, right? And so they even muddied all of that up, right? And so we can go with the Magi, right? Your magistrate, your majesty, and imagine. They've been doing, those are the people who are doing all this, right? The ones who know all the secrets, and they ran amok. And so they created all these societies to keep us, guessing and running in circles, I would say.
Right. Well, Yiz says, by calling us all equal human beings as recognizing out complementary differences. The people who recognize out the complementary differences are the ones doing the breeding programs, right? Certain things happen for a reason. You're being look, they know your ancestry. They know what you're about. They know where to keep you in society. It's not just public school where they keep you in certain boxes. It's the rest of your life they keep you in boxes. They keep you tagged, traced, and they've been doing that forever. It's
Listen,
not it's not hard to do. They've got thousands of bureaucrats who are told to do awful things to people for no particular reason.
listen, you know what? It's funny you say that because they figured this out. Like, okay, so you start off in the world, and I was poor, right? So I was chasing that dollar. And so I put my head down and of course, I studied, Tony Robbins and, all these, fine, mentalists, from Dale Carnegie to, all of them. Anyway, how the point is that I was chasing that money, and that's what they want because then the ego grows, and that is Satan, right? The adversary. And so the ego will present all these things to you, right? And so you have the choice. But when you're traumatized and you want to, kind of fit into this fake society, the illusion, they have you chasing it. By the time you figure it out, you're like 40 something, and you ain't got time because you got a family and you're mired into trying to control the karma that you've already set off with the children you created, and so they've planned this out really well.
Well, what it is a matter of statistics, right? So for the longest time, the best way to predict an outcome is to use certain statistics from the genetic expressions that you have. So they know what basic family line you come from, and they know who they would rather not see produce offspring in that family line. And so basically, they can pick people at random and get good outcomes when it comes to statistics. So is it you specifically, or is it just fuck you in that general direction? It could be either, right? So what we think of as being a disconnected group of individuals is a long and very documentable family tree that they're paying attention to. We're not. We don't have that kind of data. But what happens every time there's a leak of DNA material over to China and then they get the entire database? What do you think they're doing with that database? Do you think that they would engage in a selective breeding program in America to try and make us even weaker? You bet your ass they would. Why wouldn't they do that? It'd be easy as shit. There's nobody protecting the walls. There are no walls, you know? So
And
the idea that, foreign governments and even domestic governments wouldn't be engaged in this type of dysgenic operations within certain family lines is completely ridiculous. And the Mormons have all of this stuff on record. They've got you on record at the Mormon temple. They've got everybody on record over there, and they've got your lineage completely marked up. You've got to understand that.
you know what's
Eugenics never
interesting?
ended.
You
Yeah,
know
go
what's
ahead.
interesting? You know what's interesting is that not only are they manipulating us this way, but they basically have us so confused. So you come out, you think you have to chase this money, and then you don't know your background because they've taken your history and they've given you all this. And that law of assumption is so powerful that it's very
Yeah.
hard to overcome. And most people can't take the time to sit with themselves to figure out that God resides within them. And the whole trick is to think that someone's going to save you. And so they have this whole thing that they've done throughout history where they go back and they just change everything just so slightly. So they give you that 80-20. Sometimes they'll give you 80% lie, 20% truth, and sometimes they'll give you 20% truth, and so on. And you always, running in that Ouroboros, chasing your tail, and you can never wake up from the illusion. And so they have total control, and they have made this a science.
Right, right. And so, what I'd like to leave everybody with is the idea that, these organizations have changed, but the goals have not. So there's never, ever been a separation of church and state. There's never, ever been a differentiation between a public person and an individual, right? There's never been any of this kind of stuff. The way that we see things now is the way that they want us to see things. If we get to the point where we can say, look, I'm not playing this game anymore. I'm going to have my own self-determination. And you start to see the signs that things could be manipulated, you can get out of it. But unless you have that knowledge, you'll never get to that point. So I think by at least elucidating a little bit of the stuff that could be happening, very, very likely is happening right now. I mean, there's a reason why the COVID vaccines were distributed the way they were. If you look back at how they were distributed and where they were distributed and the families that they wanted to affect, it's because they have everybody mapped out. It's very important to realize that. So the less you cooperate, the less you play into these games that they're playing right now, the less power they're going to have in the future. And that could be why this reset is so important, because at this point in history, we have access to each and every one of you if you're willing to listen, right? And once you're willing to listen, you can start to get your energy right. And once you get your energy right, then you become unmanageable. And I don't know what they're going to do at that point, but let's face it, I'd rather die unmanageable than in a pen somewhere.
Well, listen, I'll leave it with this, okay? I say, look, if you can manage yourself and untangle from TV, as Anton LaVey would say, that's a satanic information right there. So a temple right there in your house, and so I would say unleash yourself from all of the propaganda that you're listening to. Get some good frequency, and really look within and eat properly. And so we all can rise above this because you know what? The enemy isn't just the Khazarians. It's actually, other participants who are pretending to be other things. And by the time you think you're going to figure it out, you'll never know who they are. So it
Right.
doesn't really matter. But if you want to save the world, save your inner child. Okay, know yourself, love yourself so you can actually spread unconditional love.
I would agree. I think the Khazarians that exist today are operating as NPCs, right? So the very, very high level ones, they're only doing what they've programmed themselves to do generations ago. They don't really have free will anymore at this point. That's one of the downsides of black magic and keeping connection with all of these ancient memories instead of allowing yourself to, fold back into the all and then come out of it. One of the big one of the big problems there is that now you're an NPC for somebody who lived hundreds of years ago. Well, that's not a very good future. You have to have at least a little bit of this. So, you know, people think of time and space as being disconnected, but I don't. I think everything is so intrinsically connected that I don't think you can even make objects at this point. Like you have to be able to see things from that perspective to understand the full unity of this place.
I would
So
agree.
thank you for joining me. We've
Yeah.
talked about the Odd Fellows and about cosmology. We always get into cosmology. Thank you again. Everybody go follow 33 Rule Magi, the Magi, 33 Rule the Magi. Give him a follow. Thank you, everybody, and good night.
Good night.